welcome to our summer camp webinar. We're gonna wait and see if a little bit more people come in, but then we're kind of just gonna jump right in so that we can hear from our presenters. Just give it 1 minute. Great. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and get started right off the bat. I want to welcome everyone to the Wisconsin Women in Conservation Summer Camp webinar on cover crops. We're super happy to have everybody here today. My name is Mercedes Talvitie. I'm the Northwest Regional Coordinator for WiWiC. And we have other WiWiC team members on this call too. You may recognize them or notice them in their pink shirts. So if everybody could just wave hello if you're on the WiWiC team or conservation coach. But I know some people are still entering, but so feel free to have your lunch during this webinar, but we have 2 amazing speakers who will be sharing lots of great information about cover crops and stories. To make sure everybody can hear them, you can probably tell that you're coming in from the waiting room and you'll be on mute. But you feel free to turn your camera on. I want to encourage everyone to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen throughout the webinar. So ask questions, engage with one another. So if you have any comments or questions, share those in the chat rather than taking yourself off mute. So we can practice the chat function right now. We'd love for everybody who is on this call to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, where you're from, or where you're tuning in from. And if you'd like, can you share what is your go-to cover crop for your land? Cool, awesome. Great, well, everyone keep sharing. Perfect, cool, lots of rye. Perfect, cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for everyone for sharing and introducing yourselves. Today, we will hear from our 2 content experts, and after that, we will have some time for questions. So put those in the chat if you get a question throughout the presentation. And then at the very end, there'll be time for us to chat out loud and folks can stay on a little bit longer. But we're going to get started with our content expert, Jamie Patton. Thank you so much for being here with us, Jamie. We're excited to hear from you, and I'm going to just tell everybody who's on this call a little bit about Jamie. Jamie is the Wisconsin Soil Health Coordinator for the USDA-Natural Resources Conservation Service, so the NRCS. In her role, she provides education, outreach, and technical guidance to farmers, agronomists, and agency and industry professionals across the state on land management practices to promote soil health and water quality. Jamie earned her soil science degrees from Iowa State and Oklahoma State universities. And then prior to joining the NRCS, she worked in educational roles with Northwest Missouri State University and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So welcome, Jamie.
Thank you so much. So I get the pleasure of doing a really quick overview of cover crops before we hear from Cass, who's actually implementing these in the field. So just think of this as a little bit of background. So we only have a short amount of time. So sit back, relax. This is going to be a whirlwind of the excitement of cover crops. So if I can get my slides to advance, why do we do cover crops, right? So there's lots of different benefits. So I just want to outline a few, and this is not exhaustive. First off, we oftentimes think of cover crops as soil protection, right? From wind and water erosion are the obvious ones, but we also need to think about cover crops as protecting our soils from moisture loss. As that residue sits on the soil surface, it helps to reduce evaporation, as well as from sunlight, right? So as that sun beats down on our soil, those soil temperatures rise, and sometimes they can rise above the threshold for microbial activity. So those cover crop residues act to keep the soil cool during the crop growing season. So when we think about protection, it's more than just soil erosion. It can protect us from these extremes of moisture and temperature as well. Another benefit of that cover crop is carbon. So we know that those cover crop roots are going to exude carbon into the soil. So they're going to leak that carbon into the soil. That's going to feed our microorganisms. That's going to contribute to organic matter accumulation in the soil, as well as the decomposition of those plant roots in the system itself. And we all know that soil organic matter is highly beneficial for soil health. It helps us to hold water, it helps us cycle and hold on to nutrients, and it provides a habitat and a food source for our microorganisms. So that's another quick benefit of using cover crops in our rotations. And as we've already mentioned, that biology. So that soil biology is helping us to cycle nutrients, to, we're going to use a big word, degrade xenobiotics or foreign chemicals in our soil. So break down those things that we're utilizing, such as pesticides in our soil. That biology helps to glue together soil aggregates, create that pore space, maintain soil health over time. And so cover crops, as they leak that organic matter from their roots, as they add those root biomass, as the plant dies, they're going to support that biological activity as well. So 3 benefits. The 4th benefit, and this may be beneficial to many of us this growing season. So I get the pleasure of driving around the state and I see excellent crops out there and I see some not so excellent crops out there. So in time, we can use those forages either as an emergency, or excuse me, those cover crops as an emergency forage, or we may plan to use them as a forage. So if we plan ahead and choose species, these can be high quality grazing crops or high quality baleage type crops or silage type crops that we can utilize on our lands. And last but not least, ecosystems. And this is a newer realm to think about. So I was trained way back in the 1990s, right? And we never thought about soils as ecosystems at that point in time. But when we think about those cover crops, right, they're not only helping to support that microbial life we always talk about, which are our bacteria, our fungi, our actinomycetes, now known as actinobacters, but they're also supporting those larger critters. So maybe those are mites, those nematodes. They're supporting those springtails, as well as larger critters yet, such as those beetles and those pollinators on the soil surface, as well as wildlife. So thinking about our birds and some of our herbivores. So really thinking about how cover crops can support that ecosystem services, not only for our animals, but also for water quality, air quality, as well as soil quality. So lots of different benefits, and we don't want to belabor this because we want to get into how do we use cover crops on our landscapes. Because the number one question I often get is, I know the benefits of cover crops. How do I pick 1 or 2 or 20 or whatever I decide to do, right? When we think about cover crop selection, I usually ask a lot of questions, right? So I'm going to ask, what are your goals? So as we pick out those species, right? Are we looking for nitrogen fixation? Are we looking for soil protection? Are we looking to build organic matter? Am I looking to suppress weeds? What are my goal or goals? And identifying those first are going to help me not only pick out the species that are going to help me reach those goals, but help me to find not a seeding rate as well as a timing of planting for those particular species. I also need to think about the growth habit, right? So what soil temperatures are required for that cover crop to germinate? Are they going to winter kill or not? Are they a warm season or cool season? When are they going to put on most of their biomass, right? Can I roller crimp that plant if I want to for weed suppression? So really thinking about the plant itself and what it needs, as well as what it can provide and how those are used to meet my goals are really important. So you can see a lot of questions so far, and I'm not even done. There's a lot of white screen here left, right? So what equipment do I have? So for many of us, we may have access to a no-till drill or a drill, which is an ideal way to get cover crops in the ground. But for some of us, we don't have that equipment. What species are amicable to broadcasting, right? Am I going to incorporate that seed or not? That incorporation may be with a rake, if we're thinking smaller scale, or maybe with full equipment, field scale equipment, if we're thinking a little bit larger scale. How am I going to terminate that cover crop? If I really want to terminate it using roller crimping, do I have access to that type of equipment? Or am I going to have to finagle something that I already have on my farm? So thinking about that equipment availability and whether or not I have access to maybe rent one from a county or another watershed organization or something along those lines to get that cover crop to meet my goals. I also need to think about pests. So not only pest suppression, so a lot of us may be using these cover crops as a living mulch. We're going to roll it down and we're going to use it to help suppress water hemp or other weeds. But we also need to think about, in particular, vegetable type systems, breaking pest cycles, right? So if I'm going to be planting a grass crop after a grass crop, maybe I might not want to use a grass as my cover crop. Or if I'm going to be planting broccoli, I may not want to use a brassica ahead of that, just to think about that disease, breaking those disease cycles, breaking some of those insect cycles over time. So thinking about my system as a whole is going to be important as I select those species. And of course, it wouldn't be a talk without talking about costs. So some of these cover crops are very, very inexpensive and are easily accessible. I can get them just about anywhere. Some of the more specialty cover crops, as we're starting to talk, for example, of maybe mung beans or something along those lines, they tend to be a little more pricey and a little, the availability is not as widespread as some of our more common cover crops. So when we sit down, I know a lot of questions, and think about what I want to use as a cover crop. It's more than just simply, oh, just use rye. It's really thinking about my system, what I want to do, how I'm going to do it, and how I'm going to best be successful in using these cover crop species, and then picking and choosing which is comfortable, accessible, and inexpensive to me. I also want us to think about above ground and below ground architecture. So I'm a soil scientist by training. So as we talked about, I really want to use these cover crops for soil protection. So thinking about how those plants grow. So on the left-hand side, what we see is a radish, right? It's a big, in this situation, it's a big plant. It takes up a lot of real estate. And you can see underneath it, it's going to have a lot of bare ground, particularly when that radish winter kills and that residue starts to decompose quite rapidly. If that happens, am I going to meet my goals for that cover crop species? Or should I think about something that is not so prostrate or low to the ground? Should I think about something that's a little more upright? And you'll notice the picture on the right, I have a buckwheat plant nestled in with some cereal grains. All of those plants are very upright. And so I'm capturing sunlight throughout the spectrum, right, throughout that vertical column. In addition, I'm getting a lot of biomass out there on the ground. And as those cover crops are terminated, the residues there are going to persist a little longer and are going to protect that soil longer. So really thinking about that plant, its architecture, and does that architecture meet my goal? I also want to think about below ground architecture. So if I'm using these cover crops to, for example, to increase organic matter, I want a prolific, heavy, fibrous root system, something very similar to that annual ryegrass, potentially on the left-hand side of the screen. If I'm looking to break up compaction at lower levels, maybe I want to think about that oilseed radish in the middle of the screen. Or if I am thinking about some surface compaction where I have platy structure or compaction at the near surface, maybe I want to think about something or incorporating some sunflowers, because we can see that root system is going to grow prolifically in the horizontal axis. So really thinking about my goal again, and how that species, I can mix species or utilize species to help me reach that goal, but really thinking above ground, how that plant grows, as well as below ground, how that plant grows. So going along with the theme of this webinar, who are my rock stars when it comes to cover crops? And so when we looked at a lot of the chat quickly before we got started, cereal rye for many of us was a rock star, right? It works well in our northern climates. Why? We can plant it fairly late. And so by late, I mean November, December, right? Depending upon the growing season. A lot of folks have told me that they have success as long as it germinates, and it will germinate at the lowest temperatures as compared to many of our cover crops. So just above freezing, oftentimes it will germinate. So I can see that well after many of my cash grain crops, well after many of my forage crops, and well after maybe I'm taking carrots out of the beds early or late fall. I have that opportunity to get that cereal rye planted. It does live over winter, and what that means is it's going to, those root oxidates are going to appear over winter and feed my microbiology all winter long. In addition, those roots keep on growing, providing me those carbon as well as those compaction alleviation benefits. I have lots of different termination options. So if I want to till it, as long as I get it early enough in the season, that is a termination option. I can use herbicides. And if I wait till anthesis, or when that seed head emerges and starts to produce flowers and pollen, I can roller crimp this plant and terminate it organically that way. And so lots of different options there. A lot of folks are planting green into cereal rye on larger scales. So we actually plant into a live plant biomass and terminate it quickly after that. And so that helps us gain the maximum benefit from that cover crop as well. It helps with weed suppression. It helps with forage production. So many of us may be using some silage in some of our livestock rations because we can harvest that around June and come back in with a warm season annual crop such as corn, such as sorghum, Sudan grass, or another forage type plant, and actually kind of double crop in that system. The caveat is if we do let that cereal rye get a little more mature, we have to really think about nutrient management so that cereal rye is not only helping us to take up nitrogen that's left over after the growing season, but because if we let it go to maturity, its C to N ratio, getting into the chemistry a little bit here, is higher. It breaks down more slowly, and the soil microbes are going to seek out nitrogen from the soil in order to break it down, and we can end up with early season nitrogen tie-up. So I just need to think about how I'm going to manage that tie-up in the season. Maybe I add manure, maybe I add some fertilizer to help the microbes break that down more quickly and get that nitrogen available. Some of my other rock stars are oats. Unlike cereal rye, oats are not as cold tolerant, but they are easy to grow. They're cheap, they're accessible. You can find oats anywhere, and they provide fast cover. So as you drive down the highway, as we're looking at some of those newly scraped out ditches, oftentimes the DOT is using oats as a cover crop there because it grows very quickly and provides that above ground vegetative cover. It can be used for forage production. So I think Cass is going to talk to us about how they utilize oats as well as peas in their operation. So really reliable. We've used oats for almost 100 years or more in much of Wisconsin. So something we know a lot about. The other caveat is it does winter kill. So it's not going to live over a season and provide those root exudates, and it's not going to germinate as cold in those colder temperatures. So we're going to want to see this in most parts of Wisconsin by maybe early to mid-August, maybe early to mid-September if you're in the southern parts. So some of my other rock stars, when we think about it, of course, I can't leave out the clovers, right? So for those of us whose goals are nitrogen fixation, and I put pictures of medium red clover, which is on the left, berseem clover, which is in the middle, and crimson clover, which is on the right. All of these plants fix nitrogen, meaning that they take the nitrogen we're breathing right now and convert it into a plant available form. They don't, but the bacteria that lives with them does. And so we oftentimes use these as a green manure type crop. That's the older term for these nitrogen fixators. Many of us in organic production will grow these, till these in, and they will supply some of the nitrogen that we need for our cash crop. There are lots of different options for clovers. You'll notice medium red clover is a short-lived perennial. So it often, if we get good enough growth in the fall, it will overwinter. Berseem, I really like berseem clover because it's a very upright clover. I like to put that in mixes so that I can capture sunlight along that vertical column. And crimson is also another option. It tends to be a little more prostrate, a little more horizontal in its growth pattern, and it will help to suppress weeds. And who doesn't love that beautiful red flower that you see there? All of these, while they should winter kill, except medium red clover, if we get plenty of snow cover or if we have mild winters like we've had over the past few years, you'll see some of these, particularly crimson clover, overwinter where we don't expect it. As we can see with those beautiful blooms, pollinator friendly and good for forage production when mixed in with those grasses. So they tend to have to be planted. They're cool seasons, so they can't be planted too early in the summer. Oftentimes they don't do well in warm temperatures, but they can't be planted too late in the fall because they don't like those cold temperatures. So they're a little picky in that aspect, but we do have a nice window here in Wisconsin to get them planted. And they tend to be a little slower to establish. So oftentimes I'm utilizing them with a quicker growing grass or a cereal so that I can get that soil protection as well before these plants really take hold. And last but not least, I'm just being real quick here, buckwheat is a good rock star cover crop. And so I utilize these mostly in vegetable production system. The reason for that is that they can go from seed to seed in as short as 45 days. So they grow extremely quickly. And when we grow them in higher populations, they're fantastic at weed suppression. And so you'll see these used a lot. For example, after a spring planting, maybe we do spring greens and we're waiting, I'm going to plant something a little later in the fall, but I have this open period in my vegetable production during the midwinter. It's a great place to put in buckwheat, right? So I have something growing, I'm feeding that microbe, I'm suppressing those weeds, and you can see from these beautiful flowers, they're pollinator friendly. Depending on your beekeeper, the beekeeper I work with doesn't like it as much. It produces a nice strong honey that he doesn't prefer, but for those who like buckwheat honey, a great cover crop out there. So they really do, it really does fill a unique niche, particularly in those vegetable production systems where I can get something cheap, easy, accessible, and get a lot of growth in a short period of time and see those benefits come through. The caveats is it's extremely quick growing, which is also one of its benefits. So if I'm unable to get to it before it produces seed, now I'm potentially going to have buckwheat for quite a while as a potential weed in that system. So oftentimes we want to terminate it before it produces viable seed. And there are some hard seeds, meaning that when I seed it, some of those seeds won't germinate that year, but instead will germinate the next year. And so I'll see it kind of pop up in the years after. It's pretty easy to control, but just to forewarn you that buckwheat can oftentimes continue to reappear in smaller populations over time, but a lot of benefit from buckwheat. So how do we choose all of these? Because I only covered, right, 5 of them. So you'll see here in a second, the website for the Midwest Cover Crop Council selection tool. So I just want to walk you through what an amazing tool this is to help us gain more information about cover crops as well as select them. So you can see on the left-hand side, what I've done is you're able to tell us where you're at. So in this instance, I said I'm in Wisconsin, I'm in Waushara County. I was able to identify my goals. So when I'm planting this cover crop, I wanted quick growth and I want to build my soil. I want to increase organic matter. I let it know, like I said, and I can choose my crop. Here I chose warm season vegetables, told it when I planted it. And when I think I'm going to harvest it, I checked well-drained soils, and I could have checked no flooding if I wanted to. And what the tool does then is hit find cover crops, is it's going to generate a table for me. So it's going to list all the cover crops. You can see that on the left-hand side. You'll see their hyperlinks. So if I want to learn more about that particular cover crop, I click on it and another screen opens up and tells me all about that cover crop. I'm also going to see how it's rated for my goals. Remember, I wanted quick cover and I wanted soil building. And so you'll see some of them are ranked excellent for that. Some of them are ranked very good. So that's what those next numbers are next to the hyperlink. But then what most people are interested in is the calendar on the right-hand side. So you'll see that my growing season, what I've identified as my growing season, is grayed out, and it provides planting dates for all of these cover crops. If we're green, it means we have reliable establishment. If it's yellow, then I might have some moisture or freeze potential that are a risk. So you'll notice that if I'm looking for a cover crop to plant after my warm season vegetables, I may consider cereal rye. I may consider oats. I may consider annual ryegrass. All of those have green bars that indicate that most of the time it's a reliable establishment. You'll notice at this point in time, bursting and crimson clover have freeze or moisture risk. This happens to be a moisture risk. So if I look ahead and think about look at my weather forecast and know that I'm going to have plenty of rain, even though it's identified as yellow, I'm going to potentially make that decision to incorporate those clovers into my mix. So it helps us narrow down those species. But in all reality, for many of us who aren't as familiar with cover crops, I'm going to look for some other great resources. And those other great resources are the faces that you see on this webinar. They're talking to your local farmers and other growers in your area. So what's been successful for them? So a lot of this is trial and error for our soils, for our climate, for our particular farming system. So using that peer-to-peer network that we have and helping us narrow down what we think will be good for our practices. We also have excellent extension personnel, NRCS personnel, land and water departments, and agronomists. So more folks we can talk to bounce ideas off and help us identify what cover crops will best help us meet our goal and be successful in our operation. In addition, there'll be some additional links popping up in your chat to some of our UW Extension as well as MPM resources, as well as NRCS resources that are out there on cover crops. How do we select them? Why do we select certain species? And what are some of the caveats on planting and termination? So a lot of information out there. So even though I only have the opportunity to talk to you, look, I'm almost close to my 22 minutes that I was given. Nailed it. All right. So, which is very unlike me. Usually I talk way too much. But you'll notice there's a lot of additional resources more than the 20 minutes we just talked. But more importantly, the next resource is the one that you really need to listen to. And that's that person who is putting cover crops out on the ground and making them successful in their operation. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over and we're going to hear from Cass.
Thanks so much for that, Jamie. That was great. Perfect. So while we're switching over to Cass's presentation, I would really love if everybody could engage in this poll. So it's going to be launched on your screen. And the question is, what are your primary goals for growing cover crops? Check all that apply. So if you could engage with that poll, answer what you think fits best. And then there's also a second question below that, which is, when do you most commonly plant your cover crops? Thanks. We're getting some great answers in. Perfect. Give it a couple more minutes to see if it sticks. Perfect. I don't really see the numbers changing right now, so I'll end the poll, but it looks like the primary goal at 90% is to build soil organic matter and soil biology. And coming in second at 61% is to suppress weeds. Very interesting. And then when are people most commonly planting cover crops? We will see that the most common is the fall between September and October, or the late fall, November to December. Very cool. So I'm going to end that poll now and share the results, just so you can look at it really briefly as we switch over to introduce Cass McKinnon, our woman landowner for today's webinar. Perfect. And I'll just get out of this and then give you a little bit of information about Cass and what they are doing. So, oops, seems like the bio is the same. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. Sorry, one second, guys. Just some technical difficulties. Perfect. Okay. Just a little bit about Cass. Cass McKinnon was raised in Nebraska and began homesteading in her early 20s out in the shortgrass prairies of Wyoming. She worked on various CSA vegetable farms and grass-based organic dairies, and was biodynamically trained and introduced to seed work at Meadowlark Hearth. Cass has a deep interest in closed systems, perennial agriculture, permaculture, and soil health. Cass obtained a degree in rangeland management with an emphasis on ecology from Chardon State College. And then Cass began her seed business Cultivating the Commons with her partner in 2020. Together, they have been farming with Whetstone Farm since 2022, integrating a grass-finished rotationally grazed beef and sheep herd, vegetable CSA, seed business, and homeschooling 6 kids together. Sounds like a blast. Perfect. So, Cass, feel free to take it away.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Love talking about cover crops and soil. So I got some pictures. I'm gonna fly up on the screen. We can see some of the projects that we've done on the farm over the last couple years. We've been at this farm for 2 years now, and have been real busy, which has been a blast. So got some cover crops. The first one I want to talk about is oats. I love oats. Like some of the things Jamie said, they grow fast. They're very inexpensive. They're going to make you feel real confident when you're going forward. So it's a good one to start with. And we actually used oats when we went to transition this 10-acre field to alfalfa, and we used it as a nurse crop, which means that we went ahead and we planted the oats when we planted the alfalfa. We were coming out of not the drought of 2023, but it was very dry, and we lucked out. We planted this in August, and then we got a couple really good rains on it, and that oat crop really helped support the alfalfa, which is much slower growing, and we were very pleased. Up here before we started, there was corn residue left over, so we grazed our cows here in the winter, and they ate a lot of the corn stubble and also put fertility out on the field. If you can find some farmers to work with who want to utilize this as a resource, especially for some of us who are up north, I'm getting about another month of extension in food before I'm feeding hay to the cattle. And it's also just a really great way to get that biology working on your land and getting that fertility out there. Don't freak out after the tillage comes through and you're like, wow, what's going on? Because it looks pretty desolate. But if you do the steps, you're gonna get here. So hang in there. That was the first time really got me. We are here picking up rocks from the field before this was planted. We worked with a local farmer who came and did our tillage. We ended up seeding it, but we borrowed his equipment. A lot of times they may charge you to pick up stones prior. And there's some things that you can always say, well, what if we can do this to help the cost? And it's a great way to get together and like get to know your land. You're walking around, you get to know your soil more and see what's going on out there. The kids were having a blast. You can see my son is literally like swimming in this like sea of dirt over here. I put this photo in. I wanted to just say, like, a lot of times we make a plan, and we also have like our idealistic situation. And one of them, we wanted to use this no-till drill. We're really excited about it, trying to do less tillage, and we got the drill out there and realized it just wasn't really functionally optimally, and nobody was quite sure how to make that happen. So we went ahead and worked with someone that did a more conventional approach to planting the field, but in the end, I think it was very successful. And even if you are using tillage, there are ways that we can rebuild that soil biology. The microorganisms, they're going to repopulate again. There's ways that we can feed them and support them. So don't be afraid to have a nice seed bed from tillage, also as a way to get rid of weeds. And so you're setting them back before you're putting in your cover crop. And it just really creates a nice seed bed. So get those soil samples done. especially before a project. It's going to be huge, how you approach it, what you want to do, what amendments you want to spread. Also know, are you on sand? Are you on clay? Is it loam? We've been really blessed with our soils here. They're very forgiving, more of a clay loam. So we hold our water when we're going through drought pretty well. It's been easy to jumpstart the organic matter. You know, and figure out if, you know, if you're on sand, you're going to be taking a different approach, and cover cropping and adding compost. We worked with the NRCS to get funding on the transition of the 10-acre oats and alfalfa field, and then like a 25-acre field that was no-till for like conventional no-till for 12 years. So they were using herbicides. So the biology is probably very low still in it. And so by recommendation, when you work with the NRCS, sometimes you have to spread a certain amendments to meet requirements so that we have an idea that that's going to be successful planting, right? And the plants are going to get off on the right foot. So here on the right, we have the box spreader with the very traditional minerals in there, like rock phosphates. And we drove that over 23-acre field before tillage. I'm a big fan of compost teas, and we will bubble about a 50-gallon trash can. We take compost that is finished. It only takes a small amount, usually like 12 cups. We add it to the water. Then you're aerating it with this bubbler that's putting oxygen in there. And then you're also adding things that are going to feed the microorganisms that were in the compost that you introduced. And then they multiply very rapidly. So there's usually a time frame within, you want to use it as well, because the microorganisms will reach this like optimum point where the populations are really high, and then it'll start to go down. So here I am with the tractor, and this is a sprayer. I have another picture that shows, and it's a very fine mist that comes out on the back, and we are spreading compost teas this way. And this is one way that I really believe that we can get living biology out on the land very quickly. I've seen it used for a number of years. People are familiar with biodynamics. It's been around for a long time as a way to basically inoculate your land, whether it's with the living organism. Maybe you want to introduce a mineral that's low. You can go out there and really nerd out about recipes and things that you can bring in to enhance your soil biology. And also it's going to help those cover crops take off. I think there's been so many fascinating things coming to light of recently about how microorganisms work in the soil. And one thing that's really sat with me is that sometimes we're seeing like, yeah, they're saying there's a drop in our minerals, or like in our potash or potassium. And I think one thing that we need to also start looking at is that even if we introduce that to the soil, if that biological life is not there and not present, the plants are not going to be able to utilize these minerals and these resources. It takes that reaction between plant roots and enzymes and all these microorganisms to make those things accessible. So here we have a seeder here. This was a fantastic tool. It's called a Brillo, BRIOLLO. It was a neighbor had it. So most of the tillage, we have a tractor, but most of the other tools and equipment we rented, and we made a relationship with somebody. And that's been so helpful, so that we haven't had to invest in that. And he did let us use the seeder, which was really exciting. So, you know, if you get in with someone good, then you can also have some fun also. And these seeders are older, but they're really great. They drop they drop the seed close. They have great soil contact, and it has a barrel that rolls behind it. So the soil to seed contact is really nice on it. On the right, you can see my partner Clint and our kids are, you can't see the scale, but we are weighing out some clover seed that we were adding as a percentage to a mix that we had gotten. I mainly have worked with Albert Lee out of Minnesota. They've been super helpful, and if you ever need like a consultation with them or have questions, you can call and set up an appointment with them, and they'll really give you the time and help you figure out ratios, or how many pounds per acre, or they have staff is really knowledgeable, so I highly recommend them. Just if you want to talk for 45 minutes, just schedule an appointment with them though. And, so we're measuring out there. So here's that alfalfa field. The oats are already coming up. These alfalfa sprouts are extremely small. We are very pleased. We seeded in August, about mid-August. The oats just jumped. I was able to take the cows out there in September, which was great because we were hurting on our permanent pastures anyways. And it just, by the time it was September, those oats were in some places 10 to 18 inches tall. Took the cows through there, moving every day, making sure we weren't eating too low where we would affect the alfalfa plants that were growing. And it was awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. The cows had a great time, and it got us through a bit of a hard time. And you can see here, we have then been able to cut hay from this alfalfa field the last couple years. And it's been very helpful to our bottom line. Hay prices were just exorbitant last year, and to be able to have this on the land and to utilize it was very helpful. And we also have a seed business, and we use a lot of cover crops in our vegetable business. So some of the things that Jamie talked about, like buckwheat, is huge. That's just like a quick one. If we need to fill in a space, we'll just broadcast some buckwheat or hand throw it, and it's up and going. Just want to watch that reseeding, but it's not very aggressive. We also utilize tarps to get the space ready for where we want to cover crop. And in like a 2-acre system, we take 1/4 of it out for a year and put it in a cover crop. And then that gets rotated through the fields the following year. So we had the tarp here, we're going to pull it back, and then we ended up seeding. Here we use this broadcast seeder a lot. It's just a walk, the earth seeder. You walk and spin the handle, and it's a rotating. It spins the seed out. It's pretty forgiving. We have a good success when I've used it for ryegrass, oats, peas. I've also done a 2-acre field with it with sorghum Sudan grass that turned out at another site. This was when we originally put the gardens in where we are now. So each plot here is about 1 acre. And then we came through and spread some compost, did the tillage. We also sprayed a biodynamic tea, which I'm doing over here in the right, to kind of counteract the fact that tillage is part of the game sometimes. I'm sorry, if you're going to go somewhere and start a new garden, I think it's worth it. It's quick. And we can feed the microorganisms and get their populations back up. And here is so in this field here was the oat and pea crop from that year that was broadcast seeded. This was an early spring seeding, which was amazing. It was lush, full. We had an awesome harvest of milky oats. So if you enjoy that, milky oats medicinally, it is great for your nervous system and super fun to pick because the oats just come right off. So we were really happy with that year. On the left here just shows how different approaches when incorporating this cover crop back into the soil. And Clint was testing out here doing some mowing and letting the crop die a little bit, and then coming through with this walk behind tiller to incorporate that green manure that's left behind, and that can create really nice structure in your soils. If you have really sandy soils, trying to build up that organic matter can help you do that a little bit quickly. So we've had good success with that. Here's the back end of that sprayer there. The arms come out, and then we're able to put amendments on the land in that way as well. And then lastly, the project I did this year was taking, we have a 40 that we still rent to traditional corn and soy. I think it's really, if you have a bigger project, put it into chunks, and then you can kind of learn as you're going along too, and you're not pulled or distracted. And so we've continued to rent a portion of this land, and this year we wanted to take 10 acres that we will possibly put into permanent pastures. And I do recommend, if you're going from a traditional corn soybean model and want to put something in a permanent pasture, really think about doing a cover crop in between, because you're going to get that help with the weed suppression that you're not going to get. Those permanent grasses are just so much slower to start that the weeds will come in over them. And I've seen really good results with putting that cover crop in, because they're going to keep the weeds down. It also allows your soil a chance to start building those microorganisms with that cover crop plant, so that hopefully there's a little more activity and life going on before you sink often more expensive seed and plants that are going to take longer. So I would really consider that. And sorghum Sudan grass is a super fun one for that, especially if you're looking to plant a little later in the season. I think we got this in late May. This year would have liked it a little bit sooner, so we were grazing it in August, but we wanted to plant it for that stepping stone before our permanent pasture, and also as a season extension for our cattle grazing, because we usually have a summer slump where our cool season grasses are no longer producing in August. And so we were able to bring the cows here. They've been grazing here for a month now in August, and you can see we ended up getting, we started when maybe it was 12 inches, and we ended up going now, it just, you can watch it grow that month as the heat units rise and it rains, and we were up to probably like 40 inches by the time we were at the end of this field. The cows loved it, and we were really happy with it. The only thing, if I could be critical, is you can see there's a lot of exposed ground here, and the sorghum could have been seeded much denser so that we would have a better trampling effect, and we would ideally have that be like a mat of sorghum, of plants on top of the soil, and not having this exposed soil. But overall, really happy with it. Worked for the extension of our season and was good feed for our cattle. So that's some of the projects we've been doing here on the farm, and thanks for letting me share with you all today.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Cass. Amazing information as always. Before we get into our Q&A session, Chris would love to take a photo of everybody. So if you're on and don't mind having your camera going, then please join us in a fun little screenshot so everybody can see how many people attend these events. And then Chris, just let us know when you're ready.
All right, it looks like we're still getting some people in there. Everybody has time to fix their hair. Sally, let's get a few more people to show us their face so that I can get a whole thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else want to show your face this morning? It's okay if you're eating. It's a lunch Zoom. All right. Well, I don't want to take time from our awesome. There's a lot of great questions.
Perfect.
Oh yeah. It says bonus points for dogs on screen. Dogs and babies. We always like more of them.
Awesome. Perfect. Right before we go into questions, we do just want to have some WiWiC announcements and upcoming events. So please check out our website for our fall learning circles that are coming up. And there's potlucks, and there's going to be a whole suite of events coming this fall. So please check out that website, our WiWiC website with upcoming events. We also have a podcast. So also tune into that. We have our listserv, which is a great way to communicate and ask questions to everybody who engages with WiWiC. And then we also have a blog, so you can read updates or hear about the events that we have. And lastly, please save the date for the Fall Educators Meetup on November 14th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. We would love to see you there. Perfect. So I'll let our WiWiC team lead the Q&A session. So feel free, and if you have a question, you can come off mute and ask that. But if not, we'll go through what was asked in the chat.
Okay, and Amy has been so on it responding, but I'm still going to ask the questions in case she has more she wants to say, or if Cass wants to chime in too. But thank you all for the folks that have put some questions in, and if you have more, now is the time. So the first one was about roller crimping, and when in the system does it make sense to do roller crimping?
So there was a great answer in the chat. So roller crimping, the challenge with roller crimping, particularly in our northern environments, is in order to actually terminate that crop with the roller crimp operation, we have to be at what's called anthesis. So the grain head has to be producing pollen. So you'll see the grain, you'll see these little yellow flowers, and you have to see pollen. This typically, depending upon where you're at in the state, is going to occur in early to mid-June. So if you need to plant before that, roller crimping may not be an option for you, but if you're planting later season crops, excellent option. So that is where it's going to fit in an operation. So we have a lot of folks that are going to plant, transplant potentially pumpkins into that system. Great for pumpkins, great for tomatoes. It may be in some of our situations, soybeans, or if we're thinking, outside the box and we're in the southern parts of the state. But the big caveat is you need to wait till it hits that point of reproduction, and that is a little later in our season. If we're going to use this as our operational tool, we really need to be specific on what variety of rye we're using. We're going to be looking at rye that's going to mature a little bit earlier, so that we can open up that window and get it roller crimped earlier in the season. Cass, do you have additional things to add?
No, we never have utilized it. I've seen it and was familiar with Rodale's design on a crimper, and it looks really cool. It's just something that we don't have the equipment for. So,
and it's something you need to talk to people who are doing it. So we need to really think about seeding rates, making what kind of equipment and the weight of that equipment and the size of there's a lot of caveats. It works excellent. There's just details to make it successful.
Thank you both. Super helpful. The next question was about buckwheat in particular and how late we can plant buckwheat. And I think I'm hearing that there's going to be some nuance with all of these, which is great.
Cass, how late do you plant buckwheat?
Oh, I mean, like you said, it's like a 45-day. So, I would just plant it. If I wouldn't even think twice about it. The seed's very affordable. And if you have a bare spot, put it out there. I mean, and consider it's going to be like 45 days, it's going to be full grown. So even if you get a little something up and the ground gets covered, great. And we broadcast, we hand throw it. It's big seed. It's very forgiving.
Yeah, oftentimes if you want to bring that down a little bit, like I said, I'm usually any cover crop seed, I want it to get 4 to 6 weeks of growth. And then that's kind of the number in my head where we're starting to see the benefits. So I look at the long-term forecast, understand what the plant wants. And if I can get 4 to 6 weeks of growth in a small scale system, use the CAS method, go for it, right? See what happens.
Love that. Okay, next question we have about mowing. So another option potentially for termination, and what your thoughts are on that possibility.
I'm looking at, sorry, Cass, I'm looking at you. Do you use mowing?
Well, we use mowing in the vegetable fields. But we still incorporate, after we have mowed, we still usually do a tillage for incorporating. I haven't personally like mowed and seen something then like necessarily terminated in that way. And we would like to use mowing in a larger scale when our forage gets ahead of us, but it would be kind of expensive, I feel like, on a large scale to also be mowing. But we have animals. If you don't have animals, it's a different game. So I don't know. What do you think, Jamie?
Yeah, and that's where I just put in if you want to actually die. So really thinking about the growth cycle of that plant. So as it approaches reproduction, it thinks it's produced seed, it thinks its whole life goal is done. And so that's typically when we want to terminate is as it is entered reproduction, but before it is produced mature seed. So stop that additional seed production. So it's a window. I'm not saying after that it may start to regrow, but it's going to be slow. So lots of great resources out there. And I put a Penn State article in there on equipment and such.
Thank you. Thank you both. So, okay, a little bit of a different space of this question, talking a bit about how do we improve the biome in a field that has been in no-till and has had herbicide treatment for a long time.
I think Cass has given a lot of good examples.
Yeah, add compost. You can do compost teas, the cover crop, and they're just so much more hardy than those perennial plants. So they're going to get things going and start introducing things.
Yeah, and this is where if you build it, they will come, right? They're already there. You just have to love on them a little bit. Give them some food, give them some shelter, stop poking at them, and they'll repopulate. So they're babies, right? They're children, right? They're little creatures. We know what they need. So give it to them.
Nurture them.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, next question is a bit about the finances of this. So if you're transitioning to a permanent pasture that was previously in row crops, was there a financial obstacle? And I guess, Cass, particularly, like, how did y'all make that decision and why, and like financial risks that you were considering and weighing the option to do that?
Yeah. Well, we did work with the NRCS. And so if you are transitioning from a field that was row cropped, there is assistance there for you. And it was easy. It was very helpful, and it's a cost share. So there's still going to be some expenses. And one thing that did come up for us in that year was the price of amendments was so high. Remember, from things we were getting from Ukraine. So they just skyrocketed. And one thing that they helped us do was that they said, okay, hey, you can spread the minimum and we'll even lower that for you, because we have an excess of compost here from the previous landowner who was raising cattle. And so we said, hey, what if we use this compost that's already here? And they worked with us in that way. I think some of those costs have come down now, but coming with them, knowing like with some of those ideas, they were super helpful and met us there. I also we did not do the whole farm at once, right? So we said, let's just do the 40 acres this year, and this is good. It's going to cost. We were still getting rent money from the other 40, so that helped to kind of subsidize that project as we were moving forward. We tried to do some of the work ourselves. That's why we were out picking rocks. But then other than that, it was a really great program and I would really recommend it.
Thanks, Cass. Jamie, do you have anything to add from the NRCS perspective and helping people with these financial pros and cons?
Right. So if there's lots of opportunities, so if NRCS is unable to help, sometimes the land and water conservation departments, as well as your producer-led watersheds, maybe even pheasants, you never know. There are lots of potential resources out there. So chat with folks. But like I said, I think Cass did a great job.
I wanted to acknowledge it's 1 o'clock. So that is the official end time. And if folks have to go, we completely understand, and have so enjoyed your company here with us this past hour. If you are able to stay on, we're going to keep asking those questions. So if you're able to, feel free, and we will be recording and sending that out after. So just wanted to let y'all know if you need to go, that's okay. Okay, the next question is about, are there any go-to species that compete well and help round up resistant weeds within fields, but are too steep to till?
There are, and you'll see I had a follow-up question on what are we using this parcel of land for? So, if we're looking at forage production, Cass gave a great example of the sorghum Sudan grass. If you get that seeded in and it grows prolifically, and it will do a great job of competing with those weeds over time. And if you're grazing or harvesting it, not allowing them go to seed again, over time, we will start to drain that weed seed bank. The opportunities with roller crimp rye or using rye at high enough populations and terminating it later in the season can be used for some of that weed suppression in veggie productions, buckwheat. So it really depends on how we're using that system, on what cover crop we're going to use. Cass?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at a possible erosion and you can't till, then you would be broadcasting probably something in there. And I think what Jamie recommended, anything that's going to grow fast and get established. So your oats, your buckwheat, your rye.
Great suggestions.
Yeah. As always, just don't let it go to seed again. And there's a foxtail question in here too. Just don't let it go to seed. So.
Yeah. That last question is, folks are having issues with foxtail coming up every time they mow between the rows. Any ideas how to keep that under control? It sounds like don't let it go to seed. Any other tips?
So do we have the options to mulch? So is there something else that we can do in our inner rows, depending upon the system, to keep that suppressed? So, if there's a compost or a mulch or a plastic that keep that foxtail out, is there an opportunity to basically, we'll call it intercropping, right? So oftentimes we're maybe having another crop, such as depending upon the system, maybe, a nice white Dutch clover or something in there that's going to keep that suppressed, that we can come back in and mow. So it really depends upon the system, but foxtail is voracious. She's really good at growing.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions they want to audibly ask? That's all that we had in the chat. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for taking this time to learn more about cover crops. Such a gift to have Jamie and Cass here to share their wealth of knowledge with us and all the different things that they have tried and successes and possibilities. It's just been a really jam-packed hour full of great information. So thank you all.